The important thing, frankly, was the meeting that lasted for 2.5 hours, or almost 2.5 hours. And in that meeting, we discussed many, many things that were very, very positive for both countries.
What tangibly emerged from that conversation? What do you feel you achieved?
I think we achieved a lot. Things emerged out that were very important.
That may be as much detail as we'll ever learn about Trump's face-to-face meeting with Vladimir Putin in Helsinki this summer, or any of Trump's 5 conversations with Putin since he's been in office. A new report in the Washington Post details a pattern of secrecy by the president around those meetings as questions mount over whether his relationship with Russia puts national security at risk. From the Post, Greg Miller, quote, President Trump has gone to extraordinary lengths to conceal details of his conversations with Russian President Vladimir Putin, including, on at least one occasion, taking possession of the notes of his own interpreter and instructing the linguist not to discuss what had transpired with other administration officials. Wow. Current and former U.S. officials said. As a result, U.S. officials said there is no detailed record, even in classified files, of Trump's face-to-face interactions with the Russian leader at 5 locations over the past 2 years. Such a gap would be unusual in any presidency, let alone one that Russia sought to install through what U.S. intelligence agencies have described as an unprecedented campaign of election interference. Joining us from the Washington Post, the reporter who broke that story, national security correspondent Greg Miller. He's also author of the book, The Apprentice, Trump, Russia, and the Subversion of American Democracy. At the table, former Congressman David Jolly and Mara Gazebach, journalist and a member of the New York Times Ed Board. Greg, I read this story and my jaw dropped, and I read it to everyone I could get on the phone. Just remarkable detail about the mechanics of keeping secret Donald Trump's relationship with Vladimir Putin. Unbelievable reporting. What did anyone that you talked to think it was about?
I mean, you had some competing versions or explanations for this. I mean, but I have to say that people that I talked to who even worked for this administration, worked in this White House, said that they had deep concerns about what was happening in these conversations all along. Didn't think it was a good idea to begin with to have these meetings, let alone go into these meetings without staff, without a game plan, without a clear agenda, and then to come out of those meetings between Trump and Putin and have little to no insight into what had transpired there. I mean, this was a source of significant concern for people inside his administration, let alone outside it.
Greg, could you detail the deviation? Your reporting does this, but the deviation from the norms is staggering. And I think if people, I worked for a president who, if he went into a meeting with a foreign leader and took some notes on the piece of paper, before he got up from the table, he would take those notes and maybe put his initials on it and hand it to the national security advisor, the secretary of state, or the staff secretary. And those notes from the meeting, anything he wrote down, even if it was a doodle, would become part of the file on that country, on that leader. Talk about how the rest of the cabinet, the rest of the national security team, the rest of the White House staff is flying blind without a record of what the president says to a foreign leader.
Right. I mean, that's right. This isn't just unusual. I mean, this is highly abnormal, bordering on unprecedented, because you're right. I mean, all the presidents that we've known in our lifetimes treat these meetings, especially with the leaders of Russia, as very high-stakes encounters, and they want the multiple staff in the room to witness those meetings, and they always designate a note-taker to take detailed basically a transcription of what transpires. And you don't have to take my word for it. You can actually go online now and read documents from as recent as the Clinton administration, basic transcripts of every meeting that President Clinton had with Boris Yeltsin. And one of the reasons is, as you put it, you know, you're as a president, you're running a government that has multiple entities and agencies that need to be on the same page. They need to know what the president is doing, what he's committing the United States government to doing in meetings with foreign leaders. And so you're leaving the State Department, the Pentagon, the National Security Council, and all of these places completely in the dark when you don't have that.
Frank Figliuzzi, the best evidence of Greg's point is that I was sometimes in meetings with foreign leaders. There is no reason for someone like me to be there other than leaders sometimes had their communicators in there, because if issues that were of interest to the press came up and both leaders went out to do a press conference, there'd be a conversation about how both of them might respond. If you are not working on behalf of this country, it makes perfect sense. But can you think of any other reason to leave your entire cabinet, your entire national security apparatus out of the loop in your conversations with an American adversary?
Well, I suppose there could also be a mental health factor here, which is extreme paranoia and distrust of those around him, so that he's the only one in the room, literally and figuratively, who can do the right thing, knows the right thing, and he has no trust in those around him. But I've got to tell you, that's not where I'm going with that, although I think there is such a factor present. Look, here's the deal. It's in our national security interest for, as everyone has said, for your closest advisors and heads of cabinet departments and your Secretary of State, your national security advisor, your DNI, if they're not in the room, to then have an immediate debrief afterwards so that they can assess everything from the psychological responses of Putin, the whatever impacts their department, whether it's defense, state, CIA. All of that needs to be immediately debriefed. And when you don't do that, and it's in our national interest to do so, then you're left with one conclusion, that it's somehow in his personal best interest to not have you in the room, and further to not brief anyone on what happened, to take the notes and have them sequestered or destroyed. What would that personal reason be? Now we're left to our imagination, but that's why we've got a special counsel.
I want to show everyone what he does to his cabinet when he does what Greg Miller has reported, an extraordinary piece of reporting with his notes about those meetings. Here's his national security team trying to answer questions up on Capitol Hill about Russia.
I believe that President Putin has clearly come to the conclusion there's little price to play here.
Bingo.
And that, therefore, I can continue this activity.
I have great confidence in my intelligence people, but I will tell you that President Putin was extremely strong and powerful in his denial today.
He's got his view. He's expressed his view. I can tell you what my view is. The intelligence community's assessment has not changed. My view has not changed, which is that Russia attempted to interfere with the last election, and that it continues to engage in malign influence operations to this day.
Is Russia still targeting the U.S., Mr. President?
Press,
let's go.
No.
Look, this is a story that is shocking on its face, that the president is meeting with a nation-state adversary and Vladimir Putin is trying to withhold any of those conversations from even getting to his closest advisors, to his national security team. It's not inconsistent with what we have seen from this president. Frankly, conversations I've had anecdotally with national security staffers who say that his cavalier attitude towards national security matters is something they wonder if it jeopardizes our own security. The most damning part of the story, though, Nicole, is the lack of explanation today from the president or the White House. Is there a reason why the president would confiscate, in Kellyanne Conway's words, the notes from this meeting? There may be, but we haven't heard it. And not hearing it, in the absence of an explanation, we're left, as Frank said, to take our suspicions to why is the president being so careful here and what is his motivation?